The woman saw that the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom. None of that sounds so bad, does it? And yet, this one simple verse sums up the foundation of our human brokenness. In the first letter of John, he describes these three components of original sin as sensual lust, enticement for the eyes, and a pretentious life. Lust, greed, and pride. Lust refers to any physical pleasure, including the pleasure of food. The tree was good for food. The sinful pleasure is not related to our need for nourishment, but rather eating more than we need because we are seeking more of the enjoyable sensation of eating. Greed refers to anything we find desirable because of its beauty or its value. Pleasing to the eye. Again, not because we appreciate its appearance. Rather, we want to possess the object of our desire. We want to own it for the sake of owning it. And pride is our desire to be our own master, desirable for gaining wisdom. Wisdom is good, but Adam and Eve wanted wisdom to make themselves equal to God. They wanted control. Do any of these disordered desires ring a bell with you? They all ring a bell with me. All of our sinfulness, each of the sins we commit, stem from this threefold root of original sin. It is not an accident that our gospel reading today gives us an account of Satan tempting Jesus with the exact same three components of original sin. Satan tempted Jesus with food, in this case with loaves of bread to abate the hunger he was experiencing after 40 days of fasting. Satan tempted Jesus with pride by suggesting he publicly demonstrate his divine nature by jumping off the parapet and letting the angels catch him and attend to him. And Satan tempted Jesus with greed by offering him all the kingdoms of the world in their magnificence. In our second reading, St. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, focuses on uniting these two realities: the fall of our first parents and the redemption by our Savior, Jesus. For much of my life, there were two things about this story of Adam and Eve that really bothered me. First, it just doesn't seem fair that all of humanity had to get punished just because two people a very long time ago messed up. In grade school, sometimes the teacher would make the whole class write an essay just because two of the kids were talking when they should have been listening. That just doesn't seem fair. The other thing that bothered me was that it gave me the impression that God had made a mistake, something I was taught and that I believed was impossible. God does not make mistakes. But it seemed like God the Father was surprised and disappointed by Adam and Eve's sin. So he kicked them out of the Garden of Eden, made life rather miserable, and then had to send his only begotten Son to suffer this horrific torture and death as payment for our sinfulness, so we could again be united to the Father in heaven. Fortunately, through the teachings of our Holy Church, I came to understand that first, the Bible is not an encyclopedia or a collection of sequential facts about history. If you recall, there are two distinct accounts of how Adam and Eve were created. Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. Each one is inspired and worthy of our belief, but they are written in the style of legends as a way of teaching us about our relationship with God. We should not get hung up on trying to take them literally as though they were news accounts. Perhaps the most important teaching for me was this: The incarnation of Jesus, our Savior, was always plan A. There is never a need for God to have a plan B. God is our creator. Our weaknesses, our lust, our greed, our pride, is no surprise to God. Yet he loves us with all that he is and desires for us to be united with him for eternity, not because of what we accomplish, but solely because we are his children. Jesus was always plan A. The cross was always plan A. The Eucharist was always plan A. And our Holy Catholic Church has always been plan A. It is our Holy Church that also gives us the tools we need to combat the temptations of Satan. St. Matthew's account of the temptation of Jesus is not there to impress us with Jesus' divinity, but to give us hope in his sharing of our humanity. Even though Jesus is fully divine, he knows by experience what it is like to be tempted by Satan because he is also fully human. You know what those tools are. We've already been hearing about them, and we are only 5 days into Lent. Of course, I'm talking about fasting, almsgiving, and prayer. I just told you that these were things you already knew about. But have you ever noticed how each one of these practices is the perfect antidote to the poisonous components of original sin? Fasting is the perfect way to mortify, to put to death physical lust. We learn to deny physical pleasure for ourselves and reorder our attention to serving others. Almsgiving, meaning any charitable gift or service without expecting anything in return, is the perfect way to mortify our greed. We can then focus on loving our neighbor in service to God. And prayer is the perfect antidote to pride. When you are having a conversation with God, it is impossible to think too highly of yourself. Prayer time allows us to become acutely aware of how completely dependent we are on our Creator. Without his willing it, we would not draw our next breath. We would cease to exist. It is in our weakness that we become available to God. We become available to serve others in love. We then become available to receive God's love in his infinite mercy. Lust, greed, pride. Fasting, almsgiving, prayer. There is no reason why this Easter should not be the most glorious Easter of our lives. We just need to stop going through the motions and use this Lent to start loving Jesus on purpose.